The Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Somni Sambo. And we go to the next report. A report on fixing illicit financial flows has been submitted to Nigeria's anti-corruption czar, and it claims that Nigerian politically exposed persons and other corrupt public officers are taking advantage of UAE's soft system to launder funds. The report attributes the rush to stash funds in the UAE by top Nigerians to the weak financial system and its openness to investors. The finding reached is that the shortcomings in the practices of financial and professional bodies of the UAE are deep, substantive, and troubling. And the report says the chances of recovery these launder funds is low. So how can these funds be refunded or recovered? Well, for analysis, let's turn to the chairman of the anti-corruption group, Human and Environmental Development Agenda, or HEDA, OLANREWAJU Suraj. Good to have you, Suraj. Now, let's take a look at this report that you have authored. You have also sent it to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. What more are you expecting from that after sending this report to the EFCC?
I think it is such an interesting one for us, and what we have done consistently at HEDA, it is to move from the accusatory relationship with the law enforcement agencies into the collaborative and partnership one of assisting with all the necessary ingredients and information to facilitate their professional discharge of their statutory mandates as agencies. So for that, we've also done this in terms of the illicit financial flow, just moving away from the figure of the fact that, Nigeria lost about $178 billion within the period of 2004 and 2013 to this illicit financial flow, to then narrow down to some of the areas where these people are from and also where these monies are invested. So otherwise, we just be banditing figures around. So now let's try and situate where the figures are located and then make it easy for the law enforcement agencies to deal with the recovery process. And very good for Nigeria is that this current government signed that mutual legal assistance treaty or agreement or MOU, as you would want to call it, with the UAE government, which does not only restrict itself to criminal matters, but also with asset recovery and anti-corruption. So this is one of the litmus tests. It is not just for the EFCC, really. It is actually for the Nigerian government, and the same thing with the Office of the Attorney General of the Federation, as this is where to start the process. We're not just talking about 10 properties or assets, we're talking about 800 assets that is just associated with about 334 government officials. A judge was also listed, government officials in NNPC, some of them ministers, governors, current and previous, law enforcement, known law enforcement officers, former also law enforcement agency officials, some of those that are known as proxies.
Sorry if I may cut you short there, Suraj. And that's why I'm actually surprised that your report did not name and shame these individuals. You just kind of like shielded them. I mean, a lot of Nigerians will want to know who these officials are. And then secondly, how wrong is it for a former government official to own a property outside the country? Is it not when you're only serving in government that the law goes against that?
Yes, so the idea usually is that quite a number of them really didn't buy after leaving office. So some of them will buy in the name of proxies, and that is where the proxies are relevant. They buy in the name of proxies, and then they change ownership after leaving office. So while in office, the properties are bought in the name of completely different people. So the point for that is that the law enforcement agencies are able to trace the money. So they go with the money and then see when it was paid, and also if someone who is a private person who is connected with a public official buys the property, it is very possible for you, by the EFCC Section 7 of the Act, for you to be invited to then come and shed light on how and where you got the money. So that can clearly show that some of them actually paid for the properties while in office, but then issued the ownership in the names of proxies. The same thing now goes to some of them that are still in office, who would buy in the name of their children or would buy in the name of their wives, pending when they leave office. So it is also possible for you to check where the children or the wife are able to source the money to buy such properties. So, I mean, we're talking about $400 million worth of properties is what is under consideration. So for us, this is really interesting to see. And when you can see that, according to the report, known
You
Nigerian
name
law
and shame
enforcement
them.
agents. Sorry?
So why don't you name and shame these individuals or even members of their family?
It is very important and interesting for investigation. So when you're associated with this, there's the name and shame that would come after ensuring that the property is already secured from depletion. So if you just name and shame, you're already giving them the hint to quickly go and dissipate the asset and make even tracing or recovery very difficult for the law enforcement agencies. So the first thing for the purpose of this work is not just the name and shame where we already identified. The first is for the recovery of those assets. And after the recovery, then the name and shame can come as a follow-up. But the first primary objective of this is for Nigeria and Nigerians to have the full value of their money that have been taken and stashed away outside because not even invested in the system by people that have been entrusted with the people's resources to have that recovered back to the system, or at least frozen in in Dubai until then recovery process would commence. But naming them already would immediately just put them on the alert, and then the property and asset is gone.
Now, let's talk about Nigeria signing 9 mutual legal assistance agreements in 2016. I mean, President Muhammadu Buhari did that here in Abuja, and we are surprised that your report seems to say that the laws between Nigeria and the UAE are very porous in tackling this issue of illicit financial flows. What more do you think Nigeria needs to do to tackle this issue of the illicit financial flows between Nigeria and the UAE?
The weakness is not just in the law, but it's also in the mechanisms for the implementation. The UAE is currently priding itself as an open market for investors in the property market. That actually is part of the basis where UAE is where it is or what it is. But we're not in any way opposed to that. We're opposed to toxic funds finding its way into such system without any form of checks that is put in place to prevent the unscrupulous elements and also people in public office to then steal and take without any form of encumbrance to such a market. And that is very important. With this report, the Nigerian government is then challenged with the 3 recent mutual legal assistance signed between Nigeria and UAE, which unfortunately also was just signed, and we only got the report. And copies of the MLA was not even made available to some of the law enforcement agencies by the government, which is actually a very poor response to such an agreement by the government. You make such an agreement available to the public to allow them to also assist you in activating them. And that is what the government needs to do at this point in time. It's very crucial that the law enforcement agencies are well handled. And the MLA became also very useful recently in the repatriation of the former Attorney General of the Federation from UAE to Nigeria. I mean, those are the very valid point that you get to also make with such statements. So Nigeria will then work through more with the Office of the Attorney General to activate the process of enforcing the MLA, and our also political class, including the parliament, is also challenged under the current dispensation to also engage with the UAE authority, considering the relationship and also the importance of the relationship between Nigeria and UAE to ensure that funds going to UAE are only legitimate funds. And the ones that are also toxic in nature are not allowed to find haven in the UAE.
Try to round off this conversation. One interesting thing that I've found is that your report is recommending that the chances of recovering the looted funds are very low, and a lot of people will not be enthusiastic when they hear this kind of information. What are the positives that we should take from this report?
So the positive that we need to take from this report is that it is possible for us, especially the media and civil society, and even ordinary citizens and the professional association. I must confess to you that this is not possible with the politicians and civil servants who are the main culprits when you talk about the illicit financial flow of this nature, but also the professional associations, lawyers, accountants, estate managers, auditors, and the rest of them are also very culpable. They assist, as they are many times enablers in dealing with some of this. So the ordinary citizens would need to start a very vigilant engagement of some of our professionals. So it is important to query some of the assets that we see them bandits around. And when you hear that some of our public officers are also going to Dubai for whatever reason, we will know that it is not just to go for holidays or just to go for shopping, but they are actually moving illicit funds through different forms and channels to UAE. And what we've done with the report, also with the analysis of some of the laws that are also very weak between the UAE, and it is not just about the Nigerian law. We also criticize the UAE and the UK law that we think will give a very good soft landing for people who are involved in some of these, illicit engagement of the assets of in the UK and the UAE. So it means that citizens can do it. It is very possible for all of us, to see things and then say things. We can actually do our own independent investigation and then come up with a report. I mean, Nigerian.
Suraj, I just have to cut you. I just have to cut in right now because I need to get this from you before we go. In less than 60 seconds, what do we do with the conspirators, people who conspire with these people in authority and to launder these funds? What are you suggesting?
Oh, I mean, so we are going to have a very separate engagement with the professional association coming out of this for us, and then also to warn them very strongly that, the civil society, as part of the larger system, would also be investigating what the professionals are doing. Because we can't pretend as if they don't have a role to play. And this is why we also support and commend the declaration by the new EFCC chairman that, bankers will have to comply with the Bankers Asset Declaration Act by declaring their assets to the office of the secretary to the government of the federation.
All
we
right.
need to start this process.
Very interesting submission. Very interesting submission there, OLANREWAJU Suraj, chairman of the HEDA, which has taken the time to review all this report and make recommendations to the EFCC. We just hope that the EFCC will actually do the needful. Thank you so much for joining us from Lagos. You're still watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including Jordan Royal Rift. Prince Hamza pledges allegiance to King after mediation. Stay with us.